Okay, so topic 8.2 in AP Bio actually is broken down into a lot of different topics all within 8.2. So I'm going to record like a series of videos to cover this energy flow through ecosystems and break it down by subject so you can pick and choose what you'd like to watch. So our first discussion, though, about energy in ecosystems is a quick chat about metabolism. So this should be a refresher from Unit 3 with cellular respiration. But basically, metabolism is the sum total, or like adding up all the chemical reactions that happen within an organism. Now, the really cool thing about metabolism is that it generates heat. And this is because as we go through like glycolysis and then the Krebs cycle and then the electron transport chain, as we are like breaking apart glucose and taking those electrons, that transformation of energy from like stored potential energy in the bonds to ATP, all of those enzymatic reactions, that transfer of energy is not, or like not transfer, conversion of energy is not 100% efficient. So in those chemical reactions, heat is released. I feel like it's something like 30 or is it 60? I don't know. It's a lot of our potential energy stored in our food is actually released as heat. And so this can be used to maintain body temperatures, especially in endotherms. So if you're wondering how the heck is this related to ecology, that's because when we think about the heat that we generate, this is tied to our food. And our food is in limited supply. And as humans, we have grocery stores. But if we're talking about ecology, in an ecosystem, in a food web, there's a limited amount of available energy. And that amount of available energy can limit population sizes, community like interactions, population growth, and all kinds of factors. So the amount of available energy in an ecosystem that the organisms then need is going to limit basically all of life. And so that is why we're starting with the discussion on metabolism. So let's go ahead, though, and talk about how the type of like organism we are and our metabolism is related to body temperature. So every organism on Earth needs to regulate, it's called thermoregulate, their body temperature at least a little bit, whether it's through an internal mechanism or through behaviors. And so if we think about why, well, our proteins, for one, like as humans, our proteins will begin to denature above 104 degrees. And so if we have a super, super high fever or we're out hiking in the desert, if our body gets too hot, this can be dangerous. On the opposite side of the spectrum, if it gets too cold, water freezes. And so if you have water freezing, when water freezes, it expands. So if you're looking at the water inside of cells and they freeze, the water expands and bursts open the cell membrane. Or if it's in plants, it can burst open the cell walls. So temperature does matter to life on Earth. So we have two strategies that have evolved on Earth for organisms to deal with their temperature. And I know I just mentioned plants and cell walls, but we're going to be focusing on animals. So we have both endotherms and ectotherms. And so their difference is mainly how they thermoregulate. So endotherms are going to use the heat that is produced by cellular respiration to maintain homeostasis and try to keep our body temperatures within a narrow range. Now, mainly on Earth, our endotherms are mammals and birds. Now, if you have followed AP Bio in order, Unit 7, you learned about convergent evolution. So endotherms in mammals and birds is not a shared derived trait, but is evolved independently in the two groups. Then we have ectotherms, and ectotherms, they don't have like internal mechanisms to maintain constant temperatures, but they do have mitochondria and they do generate heat. So they generate heat through metabolism, but they don't have ways to like maintain that temperature. So they use behavioral mechanisms and the environment to help kind of thermoregulate. So here I have a gathering of snakes. There's some snakes that live like in really, I think it's Canada, like really cold temperatures. And when they come out of a state of torpor, they actually will like group together and use each other's body heat to warm up. And then, or if you see like reptiles, like lizards on sunbathing on rocks and things, so they're absorbing heat from the sun, but also heat from the rock. And if we look at this in a graph form, what we can see here is that an ectotherm's body temperature is basically dependent on environmental temperature. So in cold environments, their body temperature is also going to be cold. And as the environment warms up, well, their body temperature will also warm up. Versus endotherms are going to try and maintain constant body temperatures, and that's homeostasis. So let's talk a little bit more about endotherms. So an endotherm is, like I mentioned, going to use metabolism to generate heat to try and keep their temperature in a narrow range. So there's a couple ways that we can minimize our heat loss to the environment, so in really cold conditions, and also how we can prevent overheating. So one really cool way is vasoconstriction and vasodilation. So this ties into feedback loops for thermoregulation. But basically, when we get really hot, one thing that can happen is our blood vessels, not only do we sweat, but our blood vessels can vasodilate. And so basically, it brings your blood vessels closer to the surface of your skin. When I run in warm temperatures, my face gets very red. And that's because my blood vessels right near the surface are vasodilating, bringing the heat that I'm generating through exercise to the surface for evaporative cooling and heat loss to help maintain or cool me down, maintain my body temperature. Now, on the opposite though, if you're in really cold temperatures and your body temperature drops, the opposite can happen is not only do we shiver to generate heat, but we also are going to vasoconstrict. So our blood vessels would actually like narrow and move away from the surface of our skin where there's cold air, and therefore it helps to like conserve heat by minimizing how much heat is lost to the environment. Okay, now if we go back to other ways, we have sweating and panting. Not all mammals sweat. So if you have like a dog, you'll see it like panting. That's going to be like for cooling down, like losing heat through its tongue. Now, another cool factor though would be like shivering, or I have goosebumps here. But if we look at animals that have feathers or fur, if you think about like what a goosebumps are in humans, like our hair follicles, like they stand up. Well, if you're a bird or a mammal, if you had a lot of feathers or a lot of hair, when that happens, it puffs up and it traps heat. And so that creates kind of like a heat trap for warm air and insulation. And then we have countercurrent exchange. Now, I live in Southern California, and I've been to the mountains when it's snowing. And what I see birds in like a lake when there's snow falling, and I think about their little feet and how cold they must be because they're endotherms trying to maintain constant temperature, and yet their legs are literally in freezing water. How do they maintain that? Like body temperature, right? Well, they have this really cool system that has evolved. So if you think about their warm body, but then their little legs, skinny legs in the cold water. So as the warm blood leaves their body and it travels down to their feet, as it is returning up back into their body, like it's all cold, what's going to happen if you look at this diagram down here at the bottom? What's going to happen is that cold blood that's returning to the body is going to absorb heat from the blood that is traveling down, like down into the leg. So as warm blood travels down into the leg, the heat is transferred to the blood that is returning, and it kind of warms the returning blood up as it enters back into the body. Okay. Now we also have ectotherms. So we saw endotherms. So now ectotherms, though, since they don't use metabolism to generate heat, they are going to use a lot of like their behaviors. And so here on the left, I have a lizard sunbathing. So the rock is going to like radiate heat. If you ever walked barefoot across hot sidewalk or hot asphalt, you'll feel the heat coming into your feet, right? Or if you got out of the swimming pool and laid on a hot sidewalk or hot sand, that heat is transferring to you, and that's what the lizard is doing with the rock, but also the sun is also shining down on the reptile. Or they can use their behaviors. So here as they exercise and do like little push-ups, they can also generate heat. Same with us when we run or something or ride a bike, like we generate heat as we are making ATP. So they can do the same thing. Now, when we talk about, I think we're wrapping up our discussion here, metabolism, and let's just keep my face here, and metabolic rate. Basically, when we hear the term metabolic rate, what we're talking about is like the amount of calories you need to maintain a constant weight. So if you did not exercise and you just like laid in bed all day and you didn't do much, like how many calories would you need to sustain life and keep your cells functioning so that without losing weight? So I know for me, my 5'2" body size, I need about 1,300 calories a day to maintain my weight. Now, if I exercise and I use up a lot more energy, I'm going to need to eat more than 1,300 calories if I wanted to maintain my weight. And so when we talk about metabolic rate in endotherms versus ectotherms, let's go ahead and look at what we see here. Let's look at the penguin, that's an endotherm living in really cold temperatures, versus this snake. So they both are 4 kilograms. So their body mass is the same size. But when we look at, if you look at the left hand, the y-axis, it says annual energy expenditure. So like how much energy they spend in the year. If you look at the bird, the penguin, compared to the snake, they're using so much more energy. They're going to need a lot more food to create or create the heat, but also to like maintain life. And so the like if you talk about food webs and ecosystems, endotherms are going to require a lot more food than ectotherms because that food is what's used to generate the heat. Now, if you look at the pie charts, what you also see is the orange slice of the pie represents the amount for thermoregulation. And what you notice in the snake is that they don't have a slice of pie for thermoregulation. They are not dedicating any of their energy taken in by food to thermoregulation. So therefore, they require less energy in life. Now, if we also talk about, here's the next slide. So if we look, so there's the thermoregulation that I was just talking about. Now, though, if we look at a small organism like this mouse, you notice that a huge amount of their energy that they take in a year is dedicated towards thermoregulation. Now, this is tied into Unit 2 on cell size, surface area to volume ratios. So when we think about like body temperature in endotherms, the body temperature is a relationship between the heat generated by metabolism, but also the heat in the environment. Now, is it cold outside? Is it hot outside? It's also based on like activity level. So there's a lot of factors going into determining body temperature. And it's pretty amazing how we have homeostasis and we have different mechanisms set in place to help us maintain constant temperatures. But really, when we talk about body size of an organism, small versus large, the smaller the organism, the higher the metabolic rate. And this is, a lot of it is because of the amount of surface area compared to the volume. So if we like go back to surface area to volume ratios, what we can think about with this elephant versus this mouse is that the mouse has a greater surface area compared to its volume interacting with the environment. So there's a lot more, as the little cells in this mouse generate heat, there's a lot more area compared to the volume for heat to be lost to the environment. And therefore this, compared to the elephant, and therefore this mouse has a higher metabolic rate to generate heat to make up for that heat loss. Now you notice here that oxygen is part of this value. So I do want to tie in, I don't have a graph here, but I do want to mention that when we talk about metabolic rate, you can measure it based on either oxygen consumption, because oxygen is required for aerobic respiration that generates the heat through the production or through the process of making ATP. So if an organism is consuming lots of oxygen, you can infer they're making lots of ATP and therefore creating lots of heat. So oxygen consumption can be tied into metabolic rate, as well as carbon dioxide being produced. So throughout cellular respiration, carbon dioxide is a waste product. So as we undergo cell respiration and you measure the amount of carbon dioxide produced, that's also an indicator of how much heat is being generated. Okay, I'm going to stop the video here. This was longer than I intended. We still have quite a bit more in 8.2, so great job.